thank you, Martin. It's great that we can reminisce about all your years with Transfield in one sort of associated exercise or another. And the first association was it AirTrain? It was AirTrain, was it not?
It was the Sydney Airport Railway Link.
Oh,
would you believe? 2000, and David Iverack was the person that recruited me in. Did the interviews at the Gateway building. I can't remember what floor, but with a beautiful view over the harbour and the Opera House.
Just the location.
And I noticed the empty office next to his, and I thought this would be wonderful. And I met him at Mascot Railway Station, and he took me 100 metres underground and put me in a storage cupboard. Day one of Transfield, which is fantastic. I mean, I had 15 great years with Transfield, but it was a welcome to Transfield. Don't get too many ideas above your station.
So I remember you had an experience in public projects through the UK and consulting, and then here in Australia.
Yeah, so I had spent 10 years or so as a consultant in the UK working on private finance deals, toll roads, privatisation of the railways in the UK. So my introduction to Transfield was around that area. It was specifically, as obviously with the railway link, that had been opened, and we had to spend some time understanding the market and the market share and how to improve performance in that particular project, but also working on some of the private toll roads in Sydney. And then after that, it was up, as you say, it was up to Brisbane. And
as chief executive?
Well, I think they're sort of general manager, but general troubleshooter, the cleaner, to go in, and that again
head honcho.
Had opened up and was underperforming, and we needed to understand why and then work our way through that. And that was a challenging period, but ultimately very rewarding as we managed to strike a new deal with the government, the local government up there, and also the banks, and make that and turn that into a very successful venture.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that put you in good stead for the next iteration, which wasn't immediately a CLV, or was it?
No, we had a little diversion into the biodiesel industry.
That's right.
Which obviously Transfield had entered into, which again was a challenge, but this time I think the challenge was to try and overcome how the big four oil companies operated and how they managed to bully a government to reverse a decision to sort of force the use of biodiesel. So difficult period, but again, one that we worked our way through, and I guess is a testament to Transfield is that they don't shy away from the challenge.
So, well, we sort of taken an investment in it, we thought we better try and make the most of it.
Well, indeed, but I mean, it was, I guess it's part of the Transfield trait that I witnessed was, it doesn't matter how tough things are, people never ran away. In fact, people came and helped you more when they knew that you were in trouble, as opposed to other businesses where I think when people are struggling or projects are struggling, you find yourself isolated quite quickly.
Well, I suppose, who knows, but we had so many tough experiences with various construction contracts that had to be sort of turned around and renegotiated or whatever, so it was kind of in our culture. So there we are. There's a series of good, bad, good or bad, good, bad, experiences already, and then then that took you through, we were saying before, to 2008.
So this was completing my journey away from being a pointy-headed engineer towards an operator, I guess. So yes, in 2008, I was given the opportunity to go over to the UK and oversee Campus Living Villages expansion into that market, which I spent a year or so sort of setting up the UK business, and then came back and was lucky enough to work in the Australian business, and then shortly thereafter sort of get to run the whole business.
The whole shitty mess.
Which again was a difficult time. It was around 2008. Obviously the financial crisis, a number of debt facilities that had to be refinanced over a 2-year period, not least in the US, where our business was severely impacted, because obviously the GFC hit harder in the US than it did in Australia, and given the option, many people decided to stay and live at home rather than use our dedicated on-campus facilities. So it's a difficult time in the US, but again, we managed to do a refinance of a US PP, the first time it had ever been done in our industry, secure 20-year finance.
Private placement.
Private placement, So, but the first time that had been done in student accommodation.
That's right. I remember all the drama too, trying to get a rating agency, and then the falling away initially of one of the rating agencies.
That's correct. I think the rating agencies had gone from giving away ratings to anybody to being very tough, and we struggled to get the rating. We had to work very hard in terms of the structure of the deal, and then we had to work very hard to sell that. And again, it was quite a substantial amount of money that we were looking for, a couple of $100 million. And yes, we closed it with 2 whole days to spare. It, I think, gave me a few grey hairs and gave the chairman, John Nyland, a few more grey hairs. But as I say, we minimised any swap break fees on that particular deal.
Yeah, what a great outcome, because and you were heading up the roadshow to sell it to the various investors or financiers, if you like.
But again, it's not about myself. There was a very strong team that was working on that, and that was not just the campus living team, but it was also the Transfield team. And I think that's the key. I guess the period that I oversaw of running that business was to transform it from what was quite a high growth entrepreneurial business, which was reliant almost exclusively on Transfield staff, to one which was a bit more of a more mature, grown-up, operational focused business, which had been able to wean itself off the parent. And I think that was a sort of 5 or 6 year period.
And indeed, that was not something that Transfield was wanting. Was working against, in the sense we were just simply trying to understand how the CLV team could become self-sufficient.
No, I mean it was terrifically helpful to be able to draw on the Transfield team, be it the tax experts or the legal nous of the Transfield team or the development nous of the Transfield team, because we didn't have those people on spec. And in fact, myself was obviously Transfield initially was only loaned into campus living, and it only became permanent later on.
Yeah, it's all a very complex business in many respects, because on the one hand it had all of these financing exercises, and on the other hand you had the custom interface with the universities and the students and the parents, if you like. I got the sense, Martin, that you're a man that comes with a good portfolio of skills and talents through the various. You just described the infrastructure experience, the consulting experience, but I got the sense that with the particular success that you had at AirTrain in Brisbane, with the customer focus there and the marketing, there was a degree of confidence that we had in you to take CLV into a similar space with its customer focus.
I think that's correct, because the challenge with campus living villages was we were working with universities, in partnership with universities. We were using their land. We were reliant on their name. We represented the university. So it was not a pure property play. It was a social infrastructure play with a partnership with a university that is not driven by making money. So we had to accommodate the needs of the university, we had to accommodate the needs of the students, and by extension the parents. We always had to accommodate our staff, who were often from a university background and therefore were more concerned with making sure that the students' needs were dealt with, even if that came at the cost of profit to the investors. So you had those 4 stakeholders, and you had to manage those. And I guess the definition of success is when each of them are equally unhappy. And I'm sure we never ever accomplished that. But we got very much closer to getting the balance right. And towards the end, it became very clear to us that the surety of revenue that the investors were seeking actually came about by keeping the universities happy and keeping the students happy. So towards the end, towards the end of my tenure, as we transformed it from a development business into an operational business, the secret herbs and spices of what makes a complex business work were being ingrained, written down, and then being repeated. And I think that's best demonstrated by the fact that the universities and the caliber of universities that were looking and actively seeking out services from CLV in my last year were very, very high level. There's University of Melbourne, but equally there was a Royal College of Music, there was St Andrews in the UK. I mean, and all of these are sort of top-notch universities. And they were actually actively seeking campus living out because of our focus on the student welfare and understanding the university's needs.
I'd like to come back to that, but I'm interested in also discussing the relation with the investors. As much, well, one aspect of it was this complexity around the structure of it, the responsible entity, the compliance regimes and the like, because I got the sense when we were on the board, I was on the board, that there was a lot of focus there for as much as anything to satisfy everyone involved, particularly the investors, the institutional investors, that we were doing the right thing. Can you, I wouldn't mind just unpicking that, because it seemed to me for us at Transfield a whole new area of exposure, which we found quite onerous in a sense.
I think that's right. I think the first thing that we should say is we were very, very lucky in that the investors that we had chosen to be part of the business were fantastic investors.
Yes, that's right.
Very understanding.
Yes.
They're wanting to learn, willing to continue to invest in the business as it grew. So we were very lucky that we had fantastic support from those investors. Doesn't take away from the fact that it was the first time that Transfield had done a managed investment scheme, and with that comes a lot of complexity and different nuances. And I think when we started, we were certainly playing things almost by the book, and over time we learned to live it. It became part of the culture of the business to understand what our obligations were to investors, how to manage potential conflicts that might have existed, because obviously as a responsible entity, your requirement is to look after the needs of all of the investors ahead of your own desires and wishes.
Correct.
And so that nuance is something that I think we worked through, and by the end, everybody was happy with how that was managed.
I think that's right. We took comfort, I think, in the sense that the investors were confident in the way the scheme was being managed, that the staple trust was being managed.
Well, I think that confidence comes from the fact that in my last year, for the fourth time, they were willing to put more money into the business. So as I say,
that's right.
the confidence came from the fact that performance, there was a demonstrated track record of performance, both in terms of financial returns, but also in terms of how the business was managed.
Coming back now to the point that you were making about the focus on the customers, if you like, the universities and the students, I was conscious of the fact that you were very keen in wanting to structure, if you like, a format, in a way, a template for the whole group to be able to, so that the operations could become more effective across the various geographies.
Well, that's right. I mean, you want to have the appropriate business systems, and you want to have the appropriate business processes that allow not a cookie cutter approach, it's not McDonald's, but certainly a consistency of performance that universities can expect when they deal with campus living villages. I think the biggest breakthrough for us as a business, however, was when we decided because we always said we stood for more than we'll give you a key at the start of the year, keep sending us the checks, and we'll have nothing to do with the students. So we had always said that we stood for more than that. We had to work very hard to actually define what that meant and then deliver it. And essentially we rolled out essentially a program of events which focused around sort of the live, learn and grow philosophy. So making sure that yes, we provided social elements and social events to create a community, but then went further than that and said, how can we help students with their learning and their studies and their academic performance, and actually how can we help them to grow as an individual, remembering that the vast majority of our customers come in at 18 and maybe leave at 20, and that's a huge development period, and how can we set them up for success beyond. And so the sort of the live, learn and grow program that was introduced by the team was hugely successful, but one that took a lot of time and effort, but was worth the investment.
Yeah, it's all good. I wanted to talk about your experience, your embracing that challenge of moving your family to the US because of the problems that we saw at the time within the US market following the GFC, and we thought that it was a huge courageous move of yours to take you and your family there.
And I was never going to disabuse you of that notion, but the reality is I'm lucky enough to be married to someone who sort of is an adventurer, and so Sarah, my wife, if I had said that Luca had come and spoken to us about opening up a branch in Neptune, she would say, well, right, let's get on with it. And I would say, it's jolly cold there. Yeah. You know, it's minus 4,000 degrees centigrade. Oh, we'll figure that out.
Because you had the tribe of how many children?
Well, we had 5 children. And I'm not trying to draw a parallel between Neptune and Houston, although some would say there's more life in Neptune than there is in Houston. But it was a challenge. And it was a challenge because obviously I was still trying to do my day job of running the business based out of Sydney,
that's right,
but living
as a global chief executive.
Exactly, yes. And living in Houston.
Yes.
But I found, yes, there were challenges and there were cultural challenges, because what we learned was that the Americans are very good at sort of passively disagreeing. So lots of nodding and yes, and we're going to get into that, and then we'll go away and do something different. So there was a challenge to be able to get the team.
That's a certain amount of courtcy that happens in that American culture.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
they're really.
It's a bit Oriental in that respect.
It almost is, and because they speak the same language and they're jolly polite, and they'll have a beer with you over a barbecue, you think you've got a good understanding of them, but often you don't.
Actually, it makes me think about, well, the British, the supreme diplomats, when they say, something like that's very brave, they really mean,
Yes, that's a courageous decision, Minister.
Courageous decision.
Yes,
that really means something else.
Yes, indeed so. So it did take some time, but I was warmly welcomed by the team in the US, and we really did begin to get our teeth into that challenge of how do we transform a business that's under pressure. We didn't have a lot of money to spend on the assets, so it really had to focus down to the local leaders and get them enthused about, whilst you may not have Buckingham Palace to sell the students, how can you make it fun? How can you roll out the program? How can we market in a more sensible way? And we spent a lot of time doing research about the markets and what worked. And towards the end, we were embracing a program of revitalization and reinvestment in those assets.
I got the sense, Martin, that the American personnel initially didn't seem to be all that commercial at a certain level. Is that?
Well, this, I guess, was the surprising thing for me, was I'm very aware of the entrepreneurial zeal of Americans, and it's okay to fail. Every millionaire has failed 3 times. What surprised me was it's okay to fail in the corporate world. And when I tried to hold people accountable, it was very difficult because it's a massive market. So we were based out of Houston, obviously the oil and gas capital. There's plenty of other jobs there. And when they had exhausted maybe the Houston market, they could go to Dallas. And then maybe they could go to Los Angeles or Chicago or New York or Boston or Florida. That you would never run out of markets, and all the Americans are very, very good with the talk.
Right.
And selling themselves.
And they could see themselves, because they're very mobile as workforce, they could see themselves, well, if it's not working for me in this town, I can go somewhere else.
I'll go and sell a story somewhere else, and I'll get another job.
Right.
So holding people accountable was very hard. And so we had to work on getting a high quality team that fitted the Australian culture of being accountable, being a team, all pulling together. Yeah. And that was a major surprise to me.
Yeah, well, I think it's a major surprise to most people, because the conventional wisdom is that the Americans are accountable, in the sense, okay, it's okay to fail, but there's also this very tough culture of yes, accountability, but surprising it didn't seem to relate to us. Was it as much due potentially to the fact that we were in that university space, and that we're sometimes taking over some of those personnel?
I think there may be partly to do with it, but I think as a culture, it's a surprise that the size of the market protects you from having to perform, because in Sydney or Melbourne, it's a small market.
Yes.
If you have underperformed, somebody will know you, and somebody is willing to say and be honest with your future employer about what your potential or what your capacity is. So I think the size of the market made it a little bit more challenging, but then also all the more rewarding when we actually managed to find some people who wanted to rise to the challenge. And we did that by probably selecting people who had not necessarily had all the qualifications and experience, but had the potential and the desire to prove themselves.
So good. I think we were having discussions also with John Nyland about CLV, of course, and I think generally from a Transfield perspective, it was seen to be a very satisfying experience. It was a very new market for us. It was a new market for Australia in a sense. We were, I think, quite innovative with that whole vertical structuring of ownership to operation. So all in all, it was a happy experience. I think the company.
I think it was an inspired decision to get John Nyland in as the first real chairman of Campus Living Villages, because he offered an enormous wealth of experience as to how universities worked, and had enormous contacts to help us to understand what matters to a university is very different from maybe what matters to a commercial organisation. And so to have somebody with that experience to guide you through that helped, and has certainly helped Transfield in the initial days of being successful and taking the business from one particular location with the University of Sydney to what became over 50 locations and almost 50,000 beds. So, I mean, it's a tremendous growth story. And as I indicated earlier, the quality of universities that were seeking out CLV by the end was terrific, and a lot of that is due to John's help in terms of understanding the market in which we operated in.
Helping to open the doors. We were fortunate, I think, in Australia. I think we hit the sweet spot, because it was just at the time that universities were starting to really think about seriously outsourcing their accommodation facilities, and we were there. So we managed to take a great. Well, in fact, so Campus Living is now the biggest operator in Australia, and of course internationally one can argue.
Well, it's the largest on-campus operator in the world.
In the world,
because its focus is on working with universities, and that's not straightforward. But I think the way that Campus Living Villages approached it was based out of Transfield's understanding of working with governments on large infrastructure projects. So a lot of that understanding of what makes a public sector institution tick was already inherent within the Transfield team, and therefore they were able to successfully apply it within initially the Australian market and grow the business very rapidly.
Investor relations, we talked about, we were fortunate with that institutional group that we had. I think, as you say, they interacted very well, I thought, with us. I mean, we all had our robust discussions.
I mean, if you listen to this conversation, you think everything was sweetness and light and there was never any problems. There were always challenges, either operationally or with the universities, and even difficult times when we had to go and talk to the investors and have some difficult conversations.
Yes, that's right.
But throughout all of that, everybody behaved sensibly, and the correct outcome was arrived at. And I think that's what I'll take most from my experience with CLV. Was it's not enough to have a good idea. You've actually got to execute it properly. You've got to understand the nuances, and you've got to behave in a certain sort of way. And I think, again, I'm looking back over the wider Transfield career, I'll always take that away, was that no matter how difficult or tense the situation, the way that people behaved in Transfield was impeccable. And as I say, you always got help and support when you least expected it. And that was the culture. And I think that was a very strong culture, and why Transfield has been successful over many years.
Well, what a great week. I couldn't finish it any better way. Thank you, Martin. And very kind.
No, thank you.
The rest of your career.
Good luck. Thank you.